to you. Today is Thursday, the 13th of August, 2026. My name is Francisco Gaffney, and this is my daily streaming all about governance, risk, compliance, and advisory boards. This week's theme is valuation readiness, utilizing the advisory board operating system, the model that we have in front of us today. So the point is that instead of showing a model, I go into a very practical implementation steps. So you can action them in your company and see how valuation is built through scale, predictability, systems, and edge. And the edge is what we're going to talk about tomorrow, which is transformation and innovation. And why I'm doing this is that instead of creating a model or going through a model in a theoretical way, I'm showing what we do at the back end of the model so you can understand why it's built this way. So the model is literally a blueprint, and from there, in your own company, you can implement all these steps, and that's the things that we're going through. And particularly, as mentioned this week, the practical approach is to create value, to rescue the value of the organization, because when the valuation is, if you're an exit, if you're looking for an exit, or investors or shareholders or loans or line of credit, rather than discounted means actually the company valuation is diminished, is giving less value than actually it is. When you go into negotiations, you are in a very strong position, and you can negotiate from a position of power, if you may, or a position where you have evidence of what you're saying, what you're doing is correct, and they cannot refuse or question the valuation of your company. When you have a higher valuation, you have two things that we mentioned across the week, also that keywords that you have to be reminded, which is transferability and optionality. Transferability means actually somebody else can do what you do, and it gives more value because this is something that actually can take over by another organization if you're exiting, or for the bank to say, oh, the risk of that you are gone and the company collapse is gone, or at least is very, very well managed. And optionality means from your side. So you don't need to be tied to one investor, one lending organizations, etc. You can go and look in and shop, if you may. You can shop around in the market because you are very certain of what you have, and it's very valuable. So today we are on milestone number 3, which is control and resilience, which is your assets, governance, risk, compliance, and performance. And when we talk performance, we are not talking about KPIs. We are not talking about individual performance. We're talking about the company performance. Is the company doing what it's supposed to do? From a valuation point of view, systems are about the trust, right? So it's not perfection, but trust. A buyer does not expect, for example, if you're going to buyer side, if you're exiting, to have zero risk. That is completely I have a bad word to that, but actually, if a buyer comes and say, "Oh, we are mitigating risk," well, yes, you can. Obviously, you should have planned for mitigating risk, control risk, etc. But if they expecting zero risk, my suggestion is to thank them for the time and walk away from that particular buyer or that particular investor, because there is no zero risk. It doesn't exist something that is zero risk. But mitigations, plans, and controls, this is a very, very good news, particularly if you have evidence of that. So an investor does not expect every process to be perfect, but people get uncomfortable when the risks are hidden or unclear or difficult to measure. And that is where the value starts getting chipped away, right? So if you want to see why some investors, some lenders say, yeah, but we have doubts, or we are thinking about it, or literally they walk away, probably they haven't said very clearly, or they haven't articulated, or they don't want you to know that they saw all this risk and they are not feeling very comfortable about them. So let's take a problem or take a look at 3 problems with this. Problem number 1 is unclear structure, right? So your structure is not very clear. So maybe the company has grown through several stages. I mean, it's very, very viable. And new entities were created, then another one, then the property was sold to another entity that actually is leased back to the main business. A product had moved, a contract stayed in an old business and had not been transferred to the new one. Some intellectual property has created by an employee, and you might have a risk there. Some by a contractor, some by some things registered, other things are not. But the revenue flows, that's not a problem, through one company, while liabilities sit somewhere else. So nobody deliberately create these kind of situations or mess, if you may, is that the business evolved. As you evolve, you start to create things just to sustain that evolution, but evolution without a cleanup eventually produce questions that are not very easy to answer, or that require a lot of time to put together as a cleanup. And during evaluation process, these questions create the uncertainty of the risk that are flagged by the buyers. Problem number 2 is operational noise. The company gets larger, more customers, more systems, more spreadsheets, more reporting, partners, approvals, board receives more information. Yet somehow it becomes harder to answer a more simpler question. For example, what went wrong if something goes wrong, right? Who owns that? Who is accountable for the things that are went wrong? How large is exposure, right? Sometimes a small little detail create a big exposure. So which number should be trust at the end of the day? So when more reporting creates less clarity, the business has a system issue. And system is not just software and hardware. System is the workflows, the operational procedures, how the things are operating in the company that creates the input and the output, right? And sometimes it's just simply who is the hierarchy of decision, or how is the hierarchy of decision is put together. So everything is concentrated in 2 or 3 people, then you have a problem, a system, a decision-making problem system there, right? So problem number 3 is a control through people rather than processes, right? This is related to the system hierarchy of decision. Someone knows what to check. Someone else remembers the workaround and pass it over the next person, but nothing is documented. So approves somebody approves unusual payments, and so why this happened? What happened here? Or manually correct customers' information. So instead of having a protocol in terms of information, security, data protection, etc., people with suppliers should be chased. People that knows suppliers, or which suppliers need to be chased and which ones shouldn't be, because actually they work very well with yourself. But then you don't have these kind of controls or mechanisms to understand how the companies are flowing in your company. And while those people are there and the process appears to work, but take one person away on that, what I call it a fragile system, and the hidden systems, the things actually are not documented, they don't have operational procedures, etc., or instruction manual. Onboarding, for example, disappears. That is a hidden system. Is the things actually make the company work that nobody knows that why is working, right? So, in other words, imagine that you're buying a house. I try to boil this down to the simplest example as possible. So, where everything looks fine, yeah. So lights are going, the appliances are working. So what's going on? Then you open a cupboard and find 3 extension leads powering all the building from one socket. So the light works, the appliances works, the alarm system works, so everything works. That is not the same thing as saying the wiring is good and can sustain that capacity for too long, right? So it doesn't matter what happened up to today, but when you start to understand actually the wiring is quite dangerous in that way, because it all depends on one socket or another extension that is leading to another extension, depends of where you're wiring this in your house, then you might have a problem, because one thing that goes off and then the whole system might be compromised because you don't understand how things are wired one to the other. Now, as a board advisor, what will advise? right? What I would suggest to do. First, start with a structure map, a one page if possible. And then you have to show things. I like one pages because it actually makes you think as the first principle thinking. If this is not happening, then all the rest is pretty much makeup, right? So apologies for the wording, but that's a reality. So if you have a one page that explains your company, then pretty much you boil it down to the first principle thinking, which is a foundation for everything else. So in that one pager, put show every relevant entity. If you have several entities, show who owns them, where the main asset sits, where contract sits, where intellectual property sits, where is the debt, the liability, the key reporting responsibilities. So this is not a guessing exercise. This is a black and white exercise, quite binary, right? If somebody has to say, I think whatever is what next, this is where the next question starts. So because this I think is not factual, it's not evidence, it's just exactly the problem, because I think means actually you cannot go back like a binder or a software or a repository for information and prove and bring the evidence of that. The second thing I suggest is create an operation map. Show the key processes. Remember that you have processes for everything in your organization, even if you don't have that documented. You have sales processes, you have customers onboarding, delivery, supports, finances, data, compliance, reporting, escalations. So all these things are processes. I say, well, you have to look and to scrutinize the whole company to understand each one of them. If you don't have that documented, yes, you have to. And sometimes it's very painful because it takes time. It takes some level of expertise and capacity to understand how a good process is documented. So you can onboard people, you can train people, and you can develop people in those areas. Once you have this documented, ask these questions. Which process still depends on one person remembering how it works, right? So then you start to look into these things and to how to bring that people and that person and say, please tell me how you go through all these things and which are the variables or the ramifications, etc. So then you start to document things, and that's where you get all these intellectual properties that are scattered around your organization in one single document. Other question you can ask is which one has too many manual steps? How much we can automate, how much we can outsource, etc. Which one regulatory creates rework? Yeah. So regulatory or if the regulation requires rework, it means that you are not compliant. So there you got two in one to fix. Where does, for example, where does information get changed outside the main system, right? And where does senior management keep risking the processes and the people? So that tells you where the operating risk sits. And the third thing to suggest today is build a risk map. Think like an outsider. You have to look from the outside in. And question that will be proper for this will be like, what would a serious buyer investigate? And this single question also is very painful because actually you are exposed yourself to yourself, right? And sometimes that's a self-criticism about your organization is very painful, as I mentioned, because you think that you're operating very well and you're very comfortable operating this way. But when you have this external scrutinization, it's very, very unpleasant. Other question you can ask is what would an investor question, what an insurer want to understand, right? So sometimes you already have insurance, but something changes, and this is a material change in the policy, and you might have a massive exposure, and you don't want that exposure to be found by somebody that is not in your organization. Or when you have circumstances, you go to the insurance company and they say, well, this is a material change of a policy that you contracted, so unfortunately we cannot cover that. And then it's too late. And anyway, other question, what would a major client test, right? So what is this? Accounting, cybersecurity, taxation, contracts, intellectual property, data, insurance, as I mentioned, basic continuity, supplier dependencies, controls. So this is the things to consider when you're building the risk map. Now, take these three maps, yeah, and every gap, and give it an owner and give it a day. Yeah, what happened in the next 30 days, 60 days, and 90 days. And that is how a cleanup becomes evaluation project instead of permanent admin process, right? So remember, you have to put together a risk map, you have to put together an operating map, and you have to put together a structure map, and then do a cleanup, give an ownership, what are the risks and the gaps that you find, and give a period of time to start to at least to document this. Once you have that puzzle, if you may, in front of you, you can stand to see how you can manage to put this in 30, 60, 90 days together to as a cleanup. It's not a very pleasing task, as I mentioned, but it's very important to have this done if you want to have a clear valuation and transferability and optionality, as I mentioned at the beginning. And now, everybody have 24 hours in a day, so you can do more than actually you're doing. That is where the advisory board helps, and is the value sitting there. The system needs different skills. So you and your team might have the skills, but actually you have to perform your daily jobs. So you cannot do more than actually you're doing. So the system so governance risk, finance, cyber, legal, tax, all these things. You might not need full-time executive capability in every one of these areas. That's what I'm trying to say. But you do need the right question asked at the right time, right? So a good advisor might say things like a process works, but mainly because experienced people know the expectations or the outcomes, right? So what will happen when these people is gone? Or what is people is on holidays? Or what happens in the last time that people were off? What are the gaps that you already found? So some information is already there and is literally a matter of documenting. An advisory board might look into this, as management trusts the numbers. That's fine, but another party might struggle to reproduce them. So why is that? What makes this happening? That your management is go all the way with this number, but other party cannot reproduce them. And this is a case that we have actually today with the company we are trying to acquire. The company is profitable. The company has revenue. The company is very solid. But when we see in the financial statement and P&L, it's very hard to understand how they put it together, how it works, right? And you say, oh, well, then you have an issue there because the accounting is not correct. Guess what? When we did the cross references, the numbers are correct. But how you can trust something that actually is reported in a way that the management today can work with, they are used to work that way. And when you go into standard GAAP accounting, you say, I don't understand what's going on here. But then you go into the contracts, the banks, and the reconciliation and matches. So it's a big problem because actually you have an uncertainty there if what is it, right? So you have to reproduce the whole thing yourself based on certain standards. Other things that the advisory board will look is the company has a valuable assets, but the proof of ownership needs cleaning. Remember that we mentioned that it's different entities, different owners, etc. It's quite complicated, particularly when it's family owning the business. Son, daughters, wives, husbands, grandparents. It's quite a scattered ownership, but they sell it as a one single company. So it's who owns what and what is on sale here. And it's very difficult to put that together. So these are not technical comments, by the way. Those comments connect directly to whatever is perceived as confidence, and confidence is part of the valuation. You have to consider this. The easier a company is to understand, the easier it becomes for somebody to take responsibility for owning it, right? So I'm happy to invest here. So also, it's the easier the risks are to see, the easier are to price, right? Because remember, there is no lack of risks, it's a lack of measurements to control and have capacity to manage those risks. This is the problem most of the time. It's not that the risk doesn't exist. Risks are everywhere, anywhere. So the stronger the system, the less a buyer has to assume everything that will fall apart once the founder of the family leaves. So what do you gain working with me? Three main things: outcomes, differentiators, and risk reduction. In terms of outcomes, it's a company that becomes easier to understand, diligence, fund, and transfer, right? So you understand the company, you can do your due diligence and say, oh, you understand what's going on. Then you can easily raise funds to buy this company and transfer this to a new owner. The differentiator is a rotating international board, international advisory board that matches the system's milestones, which is the models that we have in front of us. So the company gets governance, risk, cyber, finances, legal, and operating capability where the gap sits without hiring every specialist permanently. And the risk reduction is to avoid this hidden risk, right? So it's a kind of a thumb twister, but actually the reality. When you reduce your risk, particularly the hidden one, this is a massive win. Issues are surfaced while management still has time to fix them, rather than after buyer has turned them into a price discussion. Because you don't want to be in a situation, and you want to be in a powerful position when you're negotiating your company, instead of trying to defend the value that you want to be perceived the company has. So one action you can take home today, and it's doable in 30 minutes or less, it doesn't take long. Here's our visual aid or our scorecard. Create your system scorecard. So 3 headlines: assets, governance, risk, compliance, and performances. And then mark each one as a red, amber, or green. Green means that you have everything documented, evidence proved, and the workflows are flawless. Amber is questions. Do we have this? Is sitting on people's head? Is transferable? Is not transferable? Do we have options? And red means actually, literally, you have nothing there and you need to put some work on it. So under each heading, write the one thing you will least like a buyer to discover without warning, right? So this is like your own self-assessment. That is where your system works begins. And remember, systems is the part that actually is workflows, operational procedures, evidence, data sets, etc., etc. So let's pause it here for today and reconvene tomorrow, because tomorrow I'm going to close the week, and also we are going to address the edge, your innovation, your transformation, what makes your company relevant today in terms of valuation. We will look on why being different is not enough. What makes a business genuinely hard to replace, and how the 4 advisory board operating system milestone combined into one valuation readiness plan. So if you are leading a company, or you're a founder, you're a part of the family with a business of 50 or more company employees and more than 10 million in revenue, and you would like to explore an advisory board to find the fixed evaluation risk before due diligence does, let's have a conversation. Let's have a chat so I can understand where you're coming from, where you are, where you would like to go, so I can explain how the International Advisory Board model works, and I will explain also the systems milestone specifically for your company based on our conversation. Have a great